I sit here now at 80, in the quiet of my little cottage on the edge of Willow Creek, where the maples turn gold every fall like they're whispering secrets to the wind. The steam from my chamomile tea curls up like old memories, lazy tendrils dancing in the slanted afternoon light that filters through lace curtains I've mended 100 times. Outside, the world hums softly, birds chasing the last warmth of the sun, leaves skittering across the porch like hesitant footsteps, the distant murmur of the creek that gave this place its name, carrying away whatever sorrows the water touches. It's a far cry from the life I had at 60, when everything I thought was solid cracked open like an eggshell under a careless foot. My name is Evelyn Harper, and if you'd told me back then that the man who walked out my door with a suitcase and a stranger's perfume on his collar would one day need me more than air, I'd have laughed through my tears. But life, it has a way of circling back, doesn't it? Not always gently, but with a purpose that leaves you breathless, wondering if the scars we carry are maps to the very redemption we never sought. That was 20 years ago, in the summer of '05, when the air in our suburban home still carried the scent of Robert's morning coffee mingling with the roses I'd planted along the walk, those deep pink blooms that unfurled like promises each dawn. We were the picture of late-life comfort, the kind that magazines romanticize with airbrush smiles and taglines about enduring love. Me, with my part-time job at the Willow Creek Library, where I'd shelve stories of love and loss for folks half my age, my fingers lingering on spines worn soft by hands like mine, seeking solace in pages that whispered, "You're not alone." Him, Robert, with his engineering firm tucked away in the old mill district, drawing blueprints for bridges that connected places people dreamed of going, sturdy spans of steel and concrete that mocked the fragility of the one we'd built together. Our daughter Sarah was grown by then, off in the city raising her own boy Liam, but she called every Sunday without fail, her voice a bridge of its own, warm and steady, pulling us into tales of playground triumphs and toddler mischief that made us ache with the sweetness of what we'd once held in our arms. I can still picture those Sunday evenings so vividly, the way the light would soften through the kitchen window, gilding the oak table where we'd set out Sarah's favorite china, the set I'd collected piece by piece from estate sales, each plate a fragment of a life unlived but imagined. Robert would lean back in his chair, the one with the faded plaid cushion I'd sewn from scraps of our old curtains, and recount his week's conquests. A client won over with a revised load-bearing calculation, a young intern's eyes widening at the elegance of a cantilever design. I'd listen, chin resting on my hand, the steam from our after-dinner decaf rising like a veil between us and the encroaching dusk. There was a rhythm to it all, unspoken but sacred. The clink of spoons against mugs, the soft creak of the floorboards as I rose to clear the dishes, his hand brushing mine in that fleeting way that said, without words, we're here still. At 60, I wasn't old by the calendars that now celebrate every decade with marathons and manifestos, but old enough to feel the weight of years like a favorite quilt. Comforting. Familiar, threaded with the faint must of time past. My hair had gone silver in soft waves that I sometimes pinned back with the pearl clip he'd given me on our 30th anniversary. A simple thing that caught the light like a captured star. My hands, etched with lines from kneading dough for family pies and turning pages for bedtime stories long since faded into memory, moved through the days with a quiet grace I took for granted. Robert and I had danced through decades together, our steps sometimes out of sync but always finding the beat again. There were the lean college years in a drafty apartment above a laundromat, where we'd pool our nickels for spaghetti nights and dream aloud of houses with yards and children with his eyes. The chaos of Sarah's toddler tantrums, her tiny fists pounding the floor while I scooped her up, Robert pacing with blueprints crumpled in his grip, both of us whispering fierce promises that we'd make it through the storm, and the quiet pride of empty nest weekends. When the house settled into a hush broken only by our hikes along the trails behind our home, the ones that wound through birch groves and up to overlooks where the valley spread out like a hand-stitched quilt, patched with fields and rooftops under skies that stretched forever. We'd promised forever in a little chapel by the lake, the summer of '67, with wildflowers in my bouquet and his vows tumbling out earnest and unpolished. In sickness and health, till the stars fall quiet. I remember the way the water lapped at the shore during the ceremony, a gentle underscore to our laughter, the scent of pine and promise thick in the air. Health, we'd joked later as we cut the cake with hands sticky from frosting. Youth was our armor then, invincible against the shadows that creep in later. But forever, I learned in the unmaking is a fragile word, easily traded for the thrill of something new, something that glitters brighter in the rear view of regret. As I gaze out my window now, watching a squirrel bury acorns for a winter it doesn't fear, its tiny paws patting the earth with a determination that tugs at something deep in my chest, I wonder about those early signs I missed. The subtle shifts like cracks in a foundation. You don't notice until the whole structure leans. Robert's laughter had grown a touch hollow in those last months, echoing a beat too long in the hallways. His eyes, once steady as the lake we'd wed by, wandered to his phone more often, screens glowing with notifications that pulled him away mid-sentence. I'd catch him staring out the window during dinner, fork paused over his plate. Lost in thoughts, he brushed off with a smile. Just work. Ev always chasing the next deadline. I remember the evening it started unraveling. Truly, the phone ringing too late on a Thursday. The summer heat still clinging to the air like an unwanted guest. His voice on the other end was low and clipped, threaded with a hesitation I'd never heard before. Evelyn, we need to talk. My heart, that foolish, faithful thing, didn't know yet that talk was just a polite word for goodbye, a velvet glove over the fist of farewell. I set down the novel I'd been reading, A Tale of Second Chances, ironically, and smoothed my skirt, the fabric cool against my palms suddenly slick with unease. The conversation that followed unfolded in our living room, the one with the faded floral sofa where we'd cuddled through countless evenings, a bowl of popcorn balanced on his knee as old movies flickered on the TV. He paced that night, shoes scuffing the rug I'd knotted years ago from wool remnants. Each step a small erosion of the ground beneath me. I've been feeling stuck, Ev, he said, words tumbling like stones down a slope I couldn't see the bottom of. Like life's passing us by, and I need more. More. The word hung there, heavy as the humidity pressing against the windows, and I reached for his hand, feeling the calluses from his drafting tools, familiar as my own pulse. But he pulled away, gentle but firm, and that's when the first real fracture appeared, the one that let in the cold draft of truth. He spoke of dreams deferred, of a vitality he'd lost somewhere between promotions and mortgages, and then, softer, almost apologetic, there's someone else, Tessa, from the firm. She reminds me of who I used to be, reminds me, as if I were the archive of his past, shelved and forgotten, while she was the fresh edition, pages crisp and uncreased. In the days that followed that revelation, before the suitcase and the door's final click, I wandered our home like a ghost in my own story, touching the relics of us with a reverence tinged with dread. The wedding photo on the mantel, yellowed at the edges, where we stood arm in arm under the chapel arch, my veil a whisper of tulle, and his suit a borrowed navy that smelled of starch and hope. I traced the curve of his smile there, wondering when it had straightened into something polite, distant. The kitchen drawer full of mismatched keys, to the cabin we'd rented for anniversaries, to the lockbox holding deeds and dreams, rattled under my fingers like unanswered questions. And in the garden, those roses I'd tended with such care, their petals now drooping slightly in the heat, as if they too sensed the withering at the root. I pruned them that afternoon, shears snipping with a sharpness that mirrored the ache blooming in my chest. Each cut a small act of defiance against the chaos threatening to overrun. Pruning, I told myself, makes way for new growth, a mantra from the library's gardening almanac. But deep down, I knew this wound ran deeper than soil, touching the marrow of who I'd believed myself to be. Wife, partner, the steady harbor in his wandering seas. There's a photograph on my mantel here in the cottage, faded at the edges like the memory it holds, of us at 50, laughing on a beach we'd driven to on a whim, his arm around my waist, the ocean stretching endless behind us, waves crashing with a rhythm that drowned out the world's noise. Salt crusted our skin that day, and we'd collapsed onto the sand, breathless from chasing gulls, his fingers weaving through mine as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in strokes of rose and amber. I touch it sometimes, in the quiet hours when the cottage creaks like an old friend sharing confidences, tracing the lines of a love that bent but didn't quite break. The way his head tilted toward mine, eyes crinkled in genuine joy, my hair wild from the wind, free in a way I haven't felt since. That photo holds the secret I've carried these 20 years. Not just the pain of his leaving, the raw scrape of abandonment that left me hollowed out and adrift, but the quiet strength it forged in me, like iron tempered in a fire too hot to endure yet impossible to escape. It prepared me unknowingly for the call that came last spring, his voice a rasp over the line, frayed at the edges like worn denim. Evelyn, I need you. You're the only one. And in that moment, as the sun dipped low and painted my walls in honeyed light, the steam from my forgotten tea cooling untouched, I realized the circle wasn't closing with a neat bow. It was just beginning to heal, thread by careful thread. The healing, though, started in the ashes of that summer, in the small acts of reclaiming the woman I'd let fade behind the roles of mother, wife, keeper of hearths. At 60, standing in the ruins of what I'd called home, I learned to listen to the creek's murmur not as a lament, but as a lullaby, carrying away the debris to make room for whatever the current might deposit next. Willow Creek has that magic, you see, a bend in the water where willows dip their branches like consoling hands, and on misty mornings the fog rolls in soft as a sigh, blurring the line between loss and possibility. It's here, in this unassuming corner of the world, that I've pieced together a mosaic from the shards. Mornings with my sketch pad, capturing the play of light on dew-kissed leaves. Evenings with Martha next door, her laughter bubbling over fences like champagne uncorked after too long sealed. And Liam, oh, that boy with his boundless curiosity, who now at 12 bounds through my door with tales of schoolyard adventures, his sketches unfurling like flags of unscarred hope. They've all been part of the quiet rebuilding, threads in the tapestry that betrayal tried to unravel. Yet even now, reflective as these golden days are, emotion stirs like silt in still water, a calm surface over depths that ache with what was and what might have been. I pour another cup of tea, the porcelain warm against my palm, and let the memories settle, not as burdens but as teachers, gentle in their insistence. The betrayal hinted at more than a broken vow. It whispered of a turning point, a pivot where pain alchemized into power, where the woman left at 60 discovered she held not just survival, but salvation in her hands. And as the maples rustle outside, there leaves a cascade of fleeting fire. I smile softly to myself. Life circles back, yes, breathless, purposeful, and achingly beautiful in its revelations. Part 2, The Betrayal. Woundy remember the sound of the door clicking shut that July evening. A soft finality like the last page of a book you'd hoped would never end, the kind that leaves you suspended in the white space after, breath held against the inevitable. It wasn't a slam, no dramatic thunder to match the storm brewing in my chest, but a deliberate, almost tender latch, as if Robert were trying one last time to be gentle with the life we were ending. He stood in the hallway just moments before, suitcase in one hand, keys jingling in the other like a mocking wind chime, his eyes avoiding mine as if looking would make the words too real, too irreversible. The air between us hung thick with the scent of his aftershave, the one I'd bought him last Christmas, sandalwood and citrus, now tainted by something floral and foreign that clung to his collar like an accusation. "It's not you, Ev," he said, voice cracking just enough to sting, a hairline fracture in the facade he'd built over months of quiet departures. "It's me. I've met someone. Tessa. She's young, full of life. She makes me feel alive again. Alive." The word landed like a slap across the quiet kitchen, echoing off the cabinets I'd painted butter yellow 2 summers ago, the ones that still held jars of preserves from berries we'd picked together. I stood there frozen in my apron, flour from the biscuit dough I'd been rolling dusting my fingers like faint snow, the rolling pin still warm in my grip, abandoned mid-task as if the meal we'd planned, simple chicken and dumplings, his favorite, had suddenly lost all flavor. He'd been distant for months leading up to that night. Little fissures I'd patched over with excuses as flimsy as tissue paper. It started with the cologne I didn't recognize, a sharper note of bergamot wafting from his shirts when he came home late from client meetings. The fabric rumpled in ways that spoke of more than desk chairs and blueprints. I'd bury my face in the laundry basket afterward, inhaling deeply, chasing the ghost of his familiar scent beneath the intruder, my stomach twisting with a nausea I dismissed as indigestion from the spicy takeout we'd shared less and less. Texts buzzed on his phone late into the evenings, the screen lighting his face in the dim glow of our bedside lamp, his thumb swiping with a haste that made my own fingers itch to know. "Just work emails," he'd murmur, rolling away to face the wall, his back a barrier broader than the king-sized bed we'd chosen for its promise of endless shared space. I'd lie there awake, the sheets cool against my skin, listening to the rhythm of his breathing shift from even to erratic, as if even in sleep he was chasing something I couldn't catch. Mornings brought forced normalcy, coffee poured with measured smiles, his hand brushing mine over the mugs in a ritual that felt scripted, the ceramic warm but his touch fleeting, like a bird alighting on a wire before flight. That night, as he outlined his plan with the precision of an engineer mapping a flawed structure, the divorce papers already drawn up by a lawyer I'd never met, the house slated for the market like so much inventory, our savings to be split down the middle like a deck of cards dealt by an indifferent house. He mentioned her name again, Tessa, letting it linger on his tongue like a secret too sweet to swallow whole. 20 years my junior, a graphic designer from his firm. With laughter, like wind chimes in a breeze I couldn't feel, and legs that went on forever in the candid photos I'd later unearth from his desk drawer. Tucked behind yellowed invoices like forbidden fruit. She sees the world differently, he said, his voice dipping into a reverence that twisted the knife deeper, as if I were a relic dusted off for display, my world too small. Too worn from years of tending the hearth while he built empires of steel and ambition. I wanted to scream then, to shatter the illusion with the truth of what I'd built alongside him, nursed him through the feverish nights of his first big project deadline, held our Sarah through colic that echoed off these very walls while he chased promotions that kept him from tucking her in. I'd mapped his scars, the faint white line on his knee from a boyhood tumble off his father's workbench, the way his left shoulder ached after rain, soothed by the heat of my palms. But the words stuck in my throat, heavy as stones smoothed by a river that had long since carved its bed, leaving me parched and voiceless. Instead, I nodded, a mechanical bob of my head, watching as he shifted the suitcase's weight, the leather creaking softly, a sound that would haunt my dreams like a hinge ungreased by time. The pain bloomed slow at first, a dull throb in my chest as I watched his taillights fade down the driveway. Twin red eyes winking goodbye through the rose bushes I'd coaxed into bloom with whispered encouragements each spring. The petals caught the porch light then, nodding in silent agreement, their velvet edges trembling as if weeping dew too early. I sank to the floor in the hallway, knees meeting the cool tile with a thud that jarred my bones and let the sobs come. Raw, guttural things that shook my frame like a tree stripped bare in a gale, branches cracking under the weight of unseen winds. My hands, those flowered betrayers, clutched at nothing but air. Nails, short and practical from years of gardening, digging crescents into palms that had once cradled his face in the quiet aftermath of love made. The house, once alive with the cadence of our routines, the clink of his fork against the plates I'd hand-painted during a pottery phase, flecked with blues and greens like the lake we'd vowed by. The murmur of our bedtime whispers trading dreams like currency, now echoed with a silence so profound it pressed against my eardrums, broken only by the relentless drip of the faucet in the kitchen, the one he'd promised to fix next weekend for 3 seasons running. I remember tasting salt on my lips, not just from the tears carving hot paths down my cheeks, but from the half-eaten sandwich I'd made him that afternoon, its crusts curling on the counter like my resolve under the fluorescent hum, mustard seeping into the butcher paper like blood from a fresh cut. Days blurred into a haze of half-shadows and halted gestures, the calendar on the fridge mocking me with unchecked boxes for hikes we'd planned and dinners with friends we'd canceled one too many times. I'd wake to the indent of his side on the mattress, a shallow depression cold as a grave, and trace it with trembling fingers, the cotton sheets whispering accusations against my skin. Whispers turned to questions hurled into the empty air. How long had the texts flown between them? Why her with her unlined laughter when my own had deepened into something richer, earned through the forge of raising a family? Was I ever enough, or just the scaffold for his climb, dismantled once the view from the top dazzled? The divorce papers came like a death certificate for the life we'd shared, crisp and official, stamped with a judge's indifference that felt colder than the autumn wind rattling the windows of Martha's kitchen. I signed them there, under the hum of her old fluorescent light that flickered like a hesitant heartbeat. Her hand steady on mine as the pen scratched across the page, each loop of my a surrender, each cross of the T a tiny crucifixion of the dreams I'd harbored. The ink bled slightly into the paper, dark spots blooming like bruises under skin, mirroring the ache that had taken root in my chest since that July night. "You're stronger than this, Evie," Martha murmured, her voice a soft anchor in the storm, her widow's eyes, deep set and knowing from years of her own quiet grieving, holding mine without pity, only the fierce solidarity of women who'd stared down loss and lived to tend their gardens anyway. Martha, with her wild tangle of herb beds out back, basil and thyme spilling over borders like defiant laughter, and her stories of Harry, the mechanic who'd fixed more than engines with his grease-stained hands, had been my next-door sentinel for 30 years, a confidant whose front porch swing had borne the weight of my every unraveling. But strength? It felt like a distant shore then, glimpsed through fog, as the gavel fell in absentia and the house, the one with the creaky stairs and the bay window where I'd read to Sarah, sold out from under me to a young couple with twins on the way, their laughter echoing through the empty rooms like a cruel echo of what I'd lost. I packed the remnants of our life in a stupor those first weeks. Boxes labeled in my neat script, kitchen mine, books, Evelyn's, memories, handle with care. The tape gun's rasp a metronome to my unraveling thoughts, sticky residue clinging to my fingers like the residue of regret. Dust motes danced in the slanted light as I folded linens scented faintly of his soap, the one with the cedar notes that now turned my stomach, and wrapped the hand-painted plates in newspaper yellowed with age, each crinkle a whisper of holidays past. Sarah swooped in like a guardian angel with a U-Haul and a no-nonsense glare, her nurse's scrubs dusted with sawdust from dismantling the bed frame we'd shared. "You can't do this alone, Mom," she said, voice brooking no argument as she hefted a dresser drawer heavy with sweaters I'd knitted during long winters, her auburn ponytail swinging like a pendulum of determination. At 8 then, Liam trailed behind her, his small hands clutching a drawing he'd made that morning, a superhero grandma with a cape billowing in invisible winds, saving the day from shadowy villains, his crayons rendering my face with exaggerated smiles and eyes like saucers of hope. He didn't grasp the fracture fully, only that Grandpa had gone on an adventure to a faraway office, a gentle euphemism Sarah and I wove like a safety net to cushion his questions. "Look, Gemma." "You're flying!" he'd chirp, holding up the paper as if it could lift the pall from the air, his freckles dancing under the attic bulb. And for a moment, amid the chaos of bubble wrap and farewell, I'd smile, fragile but real, tucking the sketch into my purse like a talisman against the tide. She found me the apartment above the Willow Creek Bakery that first month, a second-floor walk-up with creaking oak floors and walls papered in faded florals, where the scent of fresh sourdough and cinnamon wafted up from below like a reluctant embrace, warm but insistent, pulling me from the numbness of unpacked boxes. "It's a start, Mom. Bread and butter." "Literally," Sarah quipped through her worry, stocking the tiny fridge with yogurt and fruit, while I arranged the few photos I'd salvaged. One of Sarah's wedding, her glow outshining the candlelight. Another of Liam as a toddler, pudgy fists in cake frosting. But the start felt like a demotion, the single bed mocking the king we'd abandoned, its headboard thumping against the wall when trucks rumbled by at dawn, jolting me from dreams where Robert's hand still reached for mine. She enrolled me in a community art class at the rec center. To get you out? Breathing fresh air and colors. Her hand squeezing mine as she paid the fee from her own thin wallet, the one stretched by night shifts and a divorce of her own that had left scars she hid behind brisk efficiency. The classes were a quiet torture at first, brushes slipping in hands that shook with unspoken rage, paints bleeding on canvas like the bank statements I'd pored over in the dim kitchen light, showing half our savings siphoned to fund Tessa's fresh start in a condo with harbor views. Robert had been generous in his guilt, or so the mediator claimed during those sterile sessions, her glasses perched like a judge's gavel, but it felt like crumbs scattered from a banquet table I'd set with my own hands. 38 years of scrimping for family vacations, socking away for Sarah's tuition, only to watch it dwindle to a pittance that barely covered the rent's monthly bite. Money stretched thin as a worn dish rag those early months, a tightrope I walked with eyes squeezed shut against the drop below, each grocery run a calculus of needs over wants, oatmeal packets over the artisanal jams I'd once indulged in, generic tea bags steeped too long to mimic the chamomile we'd shared. The library job, with its gentle hush and scent of aged paper, paid in quiet satisfaction but pennies for the till, barely staving off the red ink that crept into my ledger like kudzu. I'd clip coupons with Martha on Sundays, huddled over her formica table with mugs of nettle tea steaming between us, her laughter a balm as we haggled over butter sales and 2-for-1 soups, scissors snipping with a rhythm that almost drowned the undercurrent of shame. "Harry and I went broke twice. Third time's the charm, they say," she'd quip, her fingers arthritic but sure, folding the clippings into envelopes like love letters to thrift. But inside, hopelessness gnawed like a persistent ache in my hip, a beast with teeth filed sharp from what-ifs that circled my thoughts at night. What if I'd demanded more in the settlement? What if 60 wasn't the invisible line where love's ledger balanced to loss? Nights I'd lie awake to the hum of the bakery ovens below, their warmth seeping through the floorboards like an uninvited comfort, replaying his parting words until they wore grooves in my mind, the way Tessa's name had rolled off his tongue like silk spun from my own unraveling threads. Sarah saw the shadows deepening clearest. Her weekend drives up from the city, turning into lifelines laced with her own fierce worry, her calls midweek sharp as she pieced together the fragments from my evasive replies. "He's poison, Mom. Let that midlife fool rot with his regrets," she'd say. Voice cracking over the line as she stirred soup on her end, the clink of spoon against pot a distant echo of our old kitchen rituals. But Liam's visits were the soft counterpoint. The boy curling on my thrift store couch with his sketchbook splayed across his knees, pencils whispering over paper as he drew us as an unbreakable trio. Evelyn the warrior queen with a sword of light. Sarah the healer with vials of glowing elixir. Him the wizard conjuring storms from crayons. Those drawings, taped haphazardly to my fridge door amid magnets shaped like apples and hearts, became lifelines when the bills piled like unanswered prayers. Electric notices in bold red. The pharmacy's reminder for arthritis meds that eased the flare-ups, but not the fury simmering beneath. I'd trace their outlines with a fingertip, the colors vivid against the humming white door, whispering to the empty room. "We're enough," even as doubt whispered back, louder. That enough was a lie for the broken. Tension built like thunderheads gathering over Willow Creek. Dark and inevitable, pressing down until the air crackled with the threat of release. A minor car accident 6 months in, a fender bender at the four-way stop. My old sedan crumpling like paper under a careless swerve. Left me with a sprained wrist wrapped in ace bandages that itched like accusations and mounting medical bills that whispered, "You're on your own," with every copay demanded. Martha rallied the neighbors in her indomitable way. A bake sale on the green with lemon bars and her famous pecan tarts. Proceeds funneled discreetly into an envelope slipped under my door. A hand-me-down coat from the widow across the street, woolen and warm but monogrammed with another's initials, a ghost stitched into the lining. Pride stung hot and unfamiliar, rising like bile when I'd catch my reflection in the bakery's window, bundled against the chill, wondering how the woman who'd once hosted block parties now accepted charity wrapped in pity. I took a second job to claw back control, evenings stocking shelves at the corner market under fluorescent lights that buzzed like swarms of doubts in my head. The air thick with the tang of produce wilting in bins and the metallic chill of canned goods stacked high. Customers blurred into a parade of indifference, their chatter on empty nests and reinventing after 50, twisting the knife as I lifted crates heavier than my heart, hands aching with the cold seep of floor-level stock, veins standing out like rivers on a drought-struck map. Sarah prodded gently during those visits, her eyes scanning my thinner frame over shared plates of pasta she'd whipped up in my galley kitchen. "You're vibrant, Mom, not some dusty exhibit. Date, join a book club, anything to remind the world you're still here." But the thought curdled in my gut like milk left too long. Trust a muscle atrophied from disuse. How do you offer your heart again when the map of your soul has been redrawn by another's careless pen? Hopelessness crested one rainy Tuesday in November. The sky a sodden gray that matched the fog in my mind as I stared into the bathroom mirror. Steam from a scalding shower fogging the glass like a veil I couldn't pierce. Eyes dulled to slate, shoulders slumped under the invisible yoke of survival's grind. I whispered to that stranger's reflection, "Fight or fold." The drip of the faucet, still unfixed, a spectral echo of Robert's procrastination, answered faint in the tile's chill. Fight. But the fight was a silent vigil, etched in the precision of laundry folded on the folding table that doubled as a desk, edges creased sharp as resolve. In the rented community garden plots where I'd till rocky soil for carrots and kale, roots struggling to anchor like my own hopes. Liam's 10th birthday arrived like a fragile beacon amid the gathering gloom, a milestone stripped of Robert's booming toasts and bad jokes. The cake I baked alone in the bakery's loaned oven, vanilla batter salting with tears that plopped silent into the mix. Chocolate frosting smeared his cheeks as he blew out candles shaped like stars, his wish whispered to me later. Breath warm against my ear, for Gamma to always smile like in my pictures, piercing deeper than any ache. Sarah hugged me fierce that night, after he'd crashed in the trundle bed, her arms a vice of shared scars from her own marital wreckage. We're enough, Mom. We always were. You, me, that wild-haired wizard in there. Yet doubt lingered, a shadow flickering at the edges of the candlelit table, fed by the stack of envelopes I'd hidden in the bread drawer, final notices sealed with wax and dread. Martha noticed the strain the next morning, pulling me aside as we hung laundry on her line, the sheets snapping like flags in the breeze. Evie, you're blooming in the cracks, don't you see? Harry's gone a decade, but I garden on, thorns and all. You will too, petal by petal. Her words planted seeds in soil, still rocky with resentment, but the tending was weary work. As years inched forward, 62 with its creakier knees, 65 marking the first white hair in Liam's mop, 68 bringing hot flashes that mocked my solitude, the struggle etched lines finer than time alone, a fluttering heart dismissed as stress during a checkup, friendships mended with threadbare trust over coffee clatches where laughter came halting, like rain after drought, tension coiled tighter, a spring wound to snapping, the air electric with the unsaid until the yellowed envelope arrived one crisp October dawn, postmarked in his familiar slant. Robert. After 8 years of void, I was wrong, please. Read this. Hopelessness, that old companion, wasn't the end. It was the hush before the revelation that would demand I unearth every buried strength to face the man who'd sown the seeds of this long, lonely harvest. The envelope lay on my kitchen table for 3 days. A paper grenade with Robert's handwriting slashing across the front in that bold slant I'd once traced with affection. Evelyn, for your eyes only. At 68, I'd grown thorns around my heart, wary of surprises that could prick the fragile peace I'd cultivated in the cottage's quiet rhythms. Morning library shifts where stories of fractured loves felt less like mirrors and more like distant echoes. Afternoons cheering Liam's awkward bows at school plays, his face alight under stage lights like a promise unscarred. The envelope mocked those routines, its edges curling slightly in the humidity, as if impatient to detonate the past I'd buried under layers of chamomile and resilience. Sarah spotted it first during one of her whirlwind visits, her nurse's gaze narrowing like a scalpel assessing a wound. Burn it, Mom. Whatever fresh poison he's peddling now after all this time. Her words carried the weight of her own guarded heart, forged in the fires of her divorce. But curiosity, that sly, relentless thief, stole the match from my hand. Under the midnight hush of the cottage, with only the creek's murmur as witness, I slid it open, the knife's edge whispering against paper like a confession long overdue. The lamp on the table cast long shadows across the wood grain, fingers of doubt pointing blame at the woman who dared to hope for silence. Inside, not the half-dreamed apology that sometimes haunted my weaker moments, the one where his voice cracked with regret over a phone line grown dusty, but a confession scrawled in trembling ink, letters leaning like a man unsteady on his feet. Tessa's gone. Took everything, the firm, the savings, my pride. And now? I'm dying, Ev. Kidneys failing, slow poison in my veins. Doctors say I need a transplant. You're the only match. Our rare type, AB negative. The blood we joked about in those premarital tests as our secret pact that would bind us forever. Bound us. The words blurred through the sting in my eyes, my pulse rising like a tide I couldn't hold back, the revelation uncoiling like smoke from a fire I'd thought extinguished. All these years, I'd carried not just the pain of his abandonment etched into my days, but a literal piece of him woven into my very blood, a hidden tether mocking the severance I'd fought so hard to embrace. I read on, the page crinkling under fingers gone numb, my heart hammering against ribs I'd armored with years of solitary strength. Each beat a drumroll to the unraveling he laid bare. Robert detailed the slow demolition of the life he'd chased. Tessa, with her ambitious gleam and designer sketches that outshone his blueprints, had charmed him into reckless investments. His firm sold off piecemeal to cover her dreams of galleries and globetrotting. Our shared savings funneled like water through a sieve until she vanished one dawn with a younger suitor, her laughter echoing in empty bank statements. Left in a dingy apartment on the city's frayed edge, dialysis tubes snaking his arms like the chains of his own folly. No children from their whirlwind years to soften the isolation. No family to claim the wreckage. His brother lost to a heart attack a decade prior. Our parents' dust on the mantle of a home he'd never visit again. I left because I was scared, Ev, he wrote, the twist slicing deeper than any blade, reopening the scar tissue I'd so carefully knit. Diagnosed with early failure back then. Misread tests from a routine check. Didn't want you watching me fade, your hands on mine as the light dimmed. Thought youth would outrun it. Tessa's fire a shield against the dark. Fool that I was, it chased me here, relentless, scared. The man who'd spanned rivers with unyielding steel, who'd held me through storms with vows of shelter, confessed that fear had been the architect of our ruin, toppling the bridge we'd crossed hand in hand. I crumpled the page then, breath ragged and shallow, the room spinning in a vortex of what-ifs turned merciless truths. What if I'd known of the diagnosis, shared the burden as we'd promised? What if his flight hadn't been rejection, but a coward's mercy? Betrayal's old wound throbbed anew, raw and insistent, but laced now with a shocking pity, a bitter brew that tasted of mercy unasked for, stirring the embers of the love I'd buried under resentment's cold ash. Dawn crept in gray and unforgiving. Finding me still at the table, the letter clutched like a talisman against my chest, its edges damp from tears that traced silent paths down my cheeks, pooling on the wood like unspoken pleas. Sarah discovered me there, her footsteps halting in the doorway, face paling as she pieced together the wreckage from my streaked expression and the paper's telltale creases. "He needs a kidney, Sarah," I whispered, voice fracturing like thin ice underfoot. "And I'm it, the only one, after all this time." Her reaction was thunder rolling in from the creek, eyes flashing with a mother's protective fury, voice a whip cracking through the air. "After what he did? Discarding you like yesterday's blueprint? Let him wither on that machine, Mom. You rebuilt this life without his shadow. Don't let him crack you now, not when you're whole." Her words landed heavy, echoing her own battles, but Liam, overhearing from the hallway where he'd snuck for a glass of water, peeked around the frame with wide, unblinking eyes, his sketchbook hugged tight like a shield. "Grandma," he ventured, voice small but steady as a heartbeat, "if you save him, does that make you a hero? Like in my stories, where the queen gives a piece of her light to the fallen king?" His innocence pierced clean through, a child's pure logic untwisting the knot in my gut, sunlight catching the freckles on his nose like stars in daylight, reminding me that mercy wears the face of the unguarded. By noon, Martha arrived unannounced, her knock soft as a prayer, tea tray in hand with her herbal brew that smelled of earth and endurance. She read the lines in silence, her sigh deep as an ocean's pull, holding volumes of her own losses. "Evie, forgiveness isn't a gift for him, it's the key to your own chains." But saving a life? That's grace, the dangerous kind that asks you to wade back into the current you barely escaped. The day fractured into a mosaic of debates, voices overlapping in the cottage's close air, Sarah's thunder, Liam's wonder, Martha's measured waves. My mind a battlefield where the Evelyn at 60, discarded and adrift like yesterday's news, clashed with this woman forged in solitary fire, now holding not just memory, but life itself in her trembling hands. The revelation shifted the ground beneath me, sadness yielding inch by inch to a raw, unbidden power, the power to choose not destruction's sweet illusion, but dawn's fragile light. Tentative and true. Tension crested a week later in the doctor's office, the sterile air thick with the tang of antiseptic and the relentless beeps of monitors charting fragile rhythms. Robert waited in a paper gown that dwarfed his frame, gaunt as the specter from my half-forgotten dreams made flesh, cheeks hollowed like valleys after flood, blue eyes shadowed but pleading with an apology words alone couldn't forge. "Ev," he rasped as I entered, the door's hydraulic sigh sealing us in, Sarah flanking me like a steadfast shield, her hand warm on my elbow while Liam's drawing, me as Phoenix, wings unfurled, tucked in my purse like a whispered vow of courage. "I don't deserve this breath, let alone your gift, but you're everything I lost when fear blinded me." The twist burrowed deeper under the fluorescent glare, harsh as judgment. Tests confirmed the match with clinical certainty, our blood singing. The same rare, defiant song, AB negative threading through veins like an unspoken vow renewed. But his chart, flipped open on the exam table, revealed more. A hidden clause buried in our old marriage documents. A life insurance payout Tessa had contested in her scorched earth departure, frozen in legal limbo like a promise deferred. "She sued me dry. Ev, lawyers bleeding what was left," he whispered, voice fraying at the edges. "But you could claim it back. For Sarah's clinic dreams, for Liam's wide world of colors. It's yours. Always was." Reversal struck like summer. Lightning, illuminating the man I'd cast as villain. Not irredeemable monster, but a soul broken on the rocks of his choices, now offering redemption's tarnished coin with hands outstretched in surrender. I stood there, the world tilting from victim's shadowed valley to arbiter's uncertain height, the letter's secrets unfurling a path woven neither of vengeance's thorns nor victimhood's chains, a trail lit by revelation's hesitant glow. The tone lifted, heavy sadness pierced by the spark of what healing truly demands. Truth, laid bare and trembling, inviting not erasure, but the brave alchemy of wounds into wisdom. The surgery was a blur of consents and counts, a whirlwind of white-coated assurances and the sharp tang of antiseptic that clung to the air like a veil between fear and surrender. Days blurred in the pre-op haze, IV lines threading cool saline into my veins, while monitors hummed their steady vigil, beeps syncing with the flutter of my pulse, a rhythm both mine and borrowed, echoing the life I'd chosen to share. Sarah's hand anchored mine through it all, her fingers interlaced with a grip born of her healer's precision, and a daughter's unspoken terror, calluses from endless shifts rough against my palm. "You sure, Mom?" she asked one last time, her voice a soft undercurrent to the hospital's muffled symphony of carts and distant coughs, the fluorescent lights casting hollows under her eyes that mirrored my own weary resolve. Liam's drawing was pinned to the curtained wall like a talisman warding off shadows. Evelyn as Phoenix, rising from ashen ruins with wings of fiery light, her expression not fierce but serene, as if rebirth were as natural as breath. I nodded then, the decision settling over me like peace after a long storm, the thunder fading to a gentle rain that nourished rather than drowned. "Not for him, Sarah," I whispered, meeting her gaze with a clarity sharpened by years of solitary dawnings. "For the woman I became without him, the one who learned to stand in her own light." Across the sterile divide, in the adjacent room where machines whispered of fragility, Robert waited, his gratefulness a quiet tide lapping at the edges of our separation. No grand speeches to bridge the chasm, just a nod through the observation glass, his eyes wet with the unpolished weight of years stolen and now perhaps reclaimed. The scalpel's whisper, when it came, freed not just a curve of tissue from my side, but the chains I'd forged in silence. As they wheeled me under the lights, the world narrowing to a pinpoint of trust, I saw it clearly at last. Justice wasn't the punishment I'd once craved in the small hours, a ledger balanced in bitter ink, but this intimate act, giving life to reclaim my own, turning the blade of betrayal into a suture of unexpected grace. Recovery wove us together in unexpected threads, fragile as spider silk yet resilient against the pull of old habits. I woke to the fog of anesthesia lifting slow, the room swimming into focus with Martha's vigil at my bedside, her chair pulled close, a thermos of her nettle tea steaming on the tray table like a humble offering to the gods of endurance. "He'd be proud of you, Evie," she said, her voice a gentle scaffold against the ache blooming under bandages, recounting tales of Harry's final days with a tenderness that stripped them of tragedy. The way he'd gripped her hand through the pain, whispering jokes about outrunning the Reaper one more lap. Loving fierce, even the hard way, that's the real bridge love. Robert's graft took root like a seed in thawed soil, color seeping back into his cheeks over the weeks, a dawn breaking slow across the shadowed valley of his decline. But the deeper mending unfolded in stolen visits. Him wheeled to my bedside in a chair that creaked like old floorboards, confessing fragments of the truth in murmurs that filled the space between us without demanding more. The misdiagnosis that had ignited his panic, a lab error buried in routine paperwork. Tessa's allure, not a siren song, but a desperate grasp at stolen time, her fire flickering out when the fuel of his illusions ran dry. "I saw you in every regret. Ev," he admitted one afternoon, voice cracking like dry leaves underfoot, his hand hovering near mine without presumption, the air between us thick with the unsaid but lighter for it. No lightning bolt of love reborn arched across the sterile gap, no fairy tale erasure of the scars we'd carved into each other, but a tentative understanding, a bridge rebuilt from the rubble, rickety with gaps where forgiveness pooled like morning mist, real in its imperfection. Sarah watched from the doorway at first, arms crossed in wary vigil, her thaw coming gradual as spring ice. When he asked after Liam's latest sketches, eyes lighting with a grandfather's quiet wonder, she handed over a set of pencils with a trembling hand, the wood smooth and unscarred. "Teach him to draw straight lines, Dad," she said, voice steady but soft, "like the ones you failed to hold." Consequences arrived not as thunderclaps but soft rains. The insurance claim, long entangled in Tessa's legal snares, unlocked at last. Funds flowing like a quiet river to Sarah's long-dreamed clinic expansion and Liam's college fund, a nest egg feathered with possibility. Tessa's shadow dissolved into the dust of dismissed suits, her absence a mercy unearned but welcomed. Robert faced his wreckage head-on, therapy sessions in fluorescent-lit rooms where words unearthed the rot, amends phoned to old colleagues with voices roughened by time, not absolved in a blaze of absolution, but accountable, the once charismatic antagonist humbled by time's unyielding mirror, lines etched deeper than ambition's gloss. Transformation bloomed in small, unassuming graces, petals unfurling one by one in the sunlight of ordinary days. Discharged to the cottage after weeks that stretched like taffy, Robert stayed on as guest rather than ghost, not reclaiming the space between my sheets, but carving a quiet corner on the porch swing where he'd chop wood for the hearth with hands slowed by arthritis. The axe biting into logs with a rhythm that echoed our shared silences, companionable now and laced with forgiveness unspoken, like herbs in a stew adding depth without overpowering. Liam, with his boundless heart, dubbed him Grandpa Fixer over breakfast pancakes one morning, the boy's sketches evolving to include Robert's profile amid the fantastical, lines softer than before, shaded with the warmth of tentative belonging, a wizard mending bridges with a pencil's point. Sarah softened in her own measured way, sharing mugs of coffee over case files spread on the kitchen table, her divorce scars finding unexpected echo in his confessions, threads of common frailty weaving them closer. We all bend under the weight. "Dad," she said one evening, steam curling between them like a truce. "But some of us break less, learn to grow around the cracks." I watched them from the garden, this patchwork family stitched from frayed edges, Liam's laughter chasing fireflies at dusk, Martha's visits bringing pies that sweetened the air, and felt dignity settle over me like a well-worn shawl, not born of revenge's hollow triumph, but of release. A quiet exhalation after holding breath too long. Health returned to us both in tentative steps along the garden paths, where the roses I'd replanted after his leaving now nodded their thorny approval, blooms fuller for the pruning they'd endured. Redemption wasn't his alone to claim, a trophy, polished in hindsight. It was mine, woven deep in the choice of mercy over the mire of grudge, strength blooming not despite the spite, but through its tempering fire. The tone warmed as the days lengthened, reflective fires banked to glowing embers that chased away the chill, forgiving not the act but the frailty behind it, weaving our wounds into the intricate quilt of wisdom, threads of silver and rose, enduring under hands that had learned to hold gently at last. Here I am at 80, stronger in my bones than I ever was at 60, the cottage wrapped in the hush of a November dawn, where frost etches delicate lace on the window panes and the first light filters through like a benediction, soft and unhurried. The air carries the faint, comforting tang of wood smoke from the hearth I tend myself now, embers glowing low through the night like the quiet embers of a heart that's learned to warm itself. My chamomile steeps on the counter, its steam weaving lazy patterns that catch the gold of sunrise, and outside, Willow Creek murmurs its eternal song, gentle, persistent, carving paths through stone without apology or haste. The walls of this place, once echoing with the sharp edges of solitude, now hum with the residue of lives intertwined, Liam's sketches pinned haphazardly from floor to ceiling, a riot of colors that burst like wildflowers against the cream plaster, dragons with benevolent eyes, queens wielding not swords but sunflowers, his latest a portrait of us all gathered at the table, lines fluid and forgiving, capturing the tilt of Robert's head in mid-story, the crinkle of Sarah's smile. Sarah's visits have become a rhythm as steady as my own heartbeat. Her scrubs traded for soft sweaters on off days, her laughter spilling into the kitchen as she stirs pots of soup that fill the air with rosemary and root vegetables, the kind of meals that bind without words. And Martha, dear Martha, with her baskets of scones still warm from her oven. Her teas steaming on the sill where condensation beads like gathered tears turn to dew. Her presence a threadbare quilt thrown over the years, mending what time frays with stories swapped over the fence. Her widow's wisdom a lantern held steady in the gloaming. Robert comes Sundays now, not out of obligation's heavy yoke, but the lighter pull of choice. His footsteps on the gravel path, a cadence I've grown to anticipate, like the reliable turn of seasons. He arrives with arms laden, not with grand gestures, but simple offerings. A bundle of fresh mint from his window box, clippings from the newspaper folded to articles on resilient gardens or second-act inventors. His hands steadier these days, the tremor of illness faded into memory. We sit on the porch swing, the one I've reinforced myself with brackets from the hardware store. Its creak a companionable underscore to his stories of second chances. The quiet triumphs of his volunteer shifts at the community center, teaching wide-eyed teens the poetry of blueprints. The letters he's penned to old flames of folly, not seeking pardon but offering it, his voice rasping soft with the gravel of age but laced with a humility that softens the edges. We've not rewritten the past, those jagged chapters inked in haste and heartache, no erasing the suitcase's shadow or the echo of a door's latch. But we've authored a gentler now. Page by careful page, proof that love's circle, bent and scarred as it may be, always finds its way home, drawn by the gravity of grace rather than force. He lingers over tea, watching the maples shed their crimson cloaks, and sometimes our hands brush, accidental, then not, calluses meeting in a language older than words, a silent acknowledgement that some bridges weather the floods, emerging stronger in their patched places. Liam calls him Grandpa Fixer still, the boy now lanky at 20, home from art school with canvases under his arm, and Robert beams showing him how to study a line, their heads bent close in a tableau that mends what words never could. Sarah, too, has found her footing in this fragile piece. Her clinic thriving on the funds that flowed from old knots untied, her hugs lingering longer when he visits. The ice of old wounds thawed to a current that carries rather than cuts. In these sun-dappled moments, as the creek's water gleams silver under the noonday sun and birds flit between branches heavy with promise, I reflect on the arc of it all, the leaving that hollowed me, the years that filled the spaces with roots of my own making, the return that asked not for erasure but evolution. The cottage, once a refuge of one, now breathes with the easy in and out of many. Martha's slippers by the door on rainy afternoons, her tales of Harry's ghost in the garden tools, Liam's guitar propped in the corner, strings humming faint tunes of youth unbound. Sarah's charts spread on the table, her dreams no longer deferred but drawn in bold strokes. Robert's chair by the fire, empty on weekdays but warmed by his presence on the Sabbath, a quiet claim on belonging earned through the slow alchemy of amends. We've woven a tapestry from threads once tangled, silver strands of forgiveness, rose hues of redemption, the deep green of growth unhurried, each stitch a testament to the beauty in mending, where the seams visible and strong tell the truest story. Life, in its circling mercy, has taught me that the heart's deepest chambers, those shadowed by betrayal's chill, hold not just echoes of loss but reservoirs of light, waiting for the courage to let it spill. And so, dear ones, as the light shifts and the day deepens into evening's embrace, remember this: betrayal may shatter you at any age, scattering your pieces like leaves in an autumn gale, but it's in the patient gathering, the deliberate reweaving, that your unbreakable core gleams forth, never too old to heal the fractures, to extend a hand across the chasm, to rise from the soil richer for the turning. You've carried storms in your sails and still found harbor. You've bloomed in barren ground, thorns guarding petals of profound tenderness. In the end, the greatest save is the one you grant your own weary heart, wrapping it not in armor, but in the soft certainty of your enduring worth. If this story touched the quiet places in your soul, share in the comments below. What's the wound you've turned to wisdom, the scar that now stories your strength? Hit subscribe to Never Too Old for more tales of women who bloom beyond the break, whose roots delve deep into the earth's unyielding kindness. Your stories, shared in the light, keep us all connected, hearts entwined across the miles.